The project I would like to talk about is about export market orientation and how non-profit companies, organizations can use this kind of knowledge base or orientation to be more successful on international markets. So this is basically the story I would like to share with you. This is a joint project with a former supervisor of mine from Budapest. His name is Professor Joseph Berac, and we used to work on different projects, and this specific project is also with him. We found this to be an interesting topic because, first of all, like market orientation and export market orientation hasn't been studied in the non-profit sector. So we thought of using this kind of approach and methodology in a non-profit sector to understand much better how non-profit organizations work, especially if they are focusing on international export markets. So that's one point why we have been doing this research. And there is another thing that market orientation is a rather complex phenomenon. If there's a company which is which would like to work as a market-oriented company, it has to change many things inside the firm, inside the organization, which means that the middle level management, the upper management, or the frontline employees have to behave in a different way, and so this is a kind of profound change in the organization. And basically, if a non-profit organization would like to resemble a profit-making organization, it should change many things inside the company, the processes, the activities, the structure, how the company works, the communication channels, the norms, the rules, the coordination mechanisms. So it's a very complex phenomenon. And we were experimenting with this idea of adapting market orientation from the business sector and just implement it in the non-profit organization. So that was basically the main idea of using this construct in a non-profit sector. It's a good question. Like there has been several studies on market orientation, and lately 3 or 4 papers have been published on meta-analysis, and they have just quoted that we don't know much about the antecedents of market orientation. We know that some kind of factors drive market orientation, for example, management commitments to market orientation or management emphasis, structural characteristics of the company like centralization, coordination, different levels, systems inside a company. But there hasn't been much research on this kind of interaction of these features, of these kind of mechanisms. So yeah, that was one of the main objectives of this research, to get these antecedents as a complex bundle of resources and capabilities, and try to understand the nature of interaction between these antecedents. Yeah, just before we started this research topic, we did a profound literature review, and that's because of the fact that market orientation hasn't been studied in the non-profit sector. So we were kind of curious if this approach might be usable, could be implemented in the non-profit sector. So we did a profound literature review. We tried to understand how non-profit organizations really work, what kind of mechanisms, values, processes are prevalent in these organizations. And we were curious if the market-oriented business approach might be implemented and under what kind of circumstances. So there was a kind of profound literature review just before we started this project. The industry is specifically the higher education. We have been doing some interviews with general managers of universities like rectors, deputy rectors, deans or deputy deans, or leaders of international offices, which are basically the moving mechanisms of these kind of organizations. And we basically were curious if these kind of processes which are prevalent in the business sector. So just before we started the whole story, we did a very profound literature review and also some field interviews in order to get some real knowledge of the possibility of implementation of this kind of orientation in the non-business environment. So basically, as I mentioned earlier, the industry is higher education sector of Hungary. So basically, we were collecting data from universities, and a sample, the whole population is something around 700 respondents. We have checked all the universities, publicly funded universities in Hungary, and we have collected data about the management, the top management, the middle management, and international offices, and we have collected names, addresses, email addresses, telephone numbers. So basically, with this approach, we came up with 700 potential respondents, and we sent out, first of all, online questionnaires to these people, and that was the first wave of data collection. Maybe 70 or 80 people responded, and after that, we sent out the questionnaire on a paper-based format, and overall, I think the response rate was something like 26%, which is around 160 people, which is kind of nice, I think. Besides that, we were doing personal interviews with people. I went to universities. I visited 10 universities on 3 different levels, like rectors, deans, and international offices. And I was talking about this management way of thinking, if it could be implemented inside the organization, and if it would help to be more successful on international markets. And just besides that, at the beginning of 2000 or something, the Hungarian government was pushing universities to be more internationalized, and they had to come up with some kind of internationalization strategies. So we went through all these kind of material. That was hundreds of pages of strategic ideas from each and every university. So that was a kind of really profound research. As I mentioned, the market orientation is, and especially export market orientation, is a kind of very complex phenomenon. And since we were focusing on the antecedents were, for example, how important market orientation is for the university, which are the main driving factors for this behavior to come alive, and these things, what kind of structural properties of the organization have an impact on the creation or implementation of market orientation. So basically the main results was that most of the big universities who are internationally focused have this kind of market orientation approach. They have it in the organization, even though they don't call this as a market orientation. But the processes, the behaviors, the structures, the norms, the values are over there, are prevalent inside the organization. So the main results were basically that those universities which were high on export market orientation, which means that they are consequently using collecting data from the environment, about customers, about competitors, about the changing environment, and using this data, using this information to come up with new services and products for the students, let it be international or domestic students, were much better on the international field or international markets. That was one idea of this research, or the subsequent result. And another issue is that market orientation is really difficult to implement inside a non-profit organization. But you have to have these kind of visionary leaders, rectors or deans, who stand just beside this idea, which means that they have resources, they have capabilities, they have courage, they have emphasis to push this kind of behavior to take effect inside the organization. So these were the main ideas, basically, of our research, if I would have to summarize it in 2 sentences. Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, market orientation is a rather complex phenomenon. It taps the whole organization, different levels, people from different functional units and different parts of the organization. So, they're to be implemented effectively within the company or the organization. There has to be a top-down effect, a managerial effect, which means that the driving force of this behavioral change comes from the top of the organization, which means that from those spheres from the organization where all the resources and capabilities are available, where all the money, the power and everything takes place, basically, because this is the way how just the cultural change takes place inside the company or the organization, if it's starting from the top of the company or organization. That's also the case with universities. Like frontline employees, like teachers or people working at the administration don't have the power, don't have the vision to think in a business way. So it has to come from the top of the school, from those people who might have some experience from the business life, or they have seen they know how the industry works, what are the driving factors for a successful organization or university to reach its strategic goals. So the practical implications of this study were the subsequent ideas. First of all, we were focusing on market orientation and more precisely export market orientation, which means that university is getting more international, attracting more students from different countries outside its home turf or home country, and it means that if universities are just behaving the way businesses are behaving outside in the real world, implementing changes, implementing the norms, the values, and just following the procedures of business companies out there, could be successful out there on the market, and especially on the international market. They can attract more students, collect funds. So the whole organization is getting more international, which is good for the whole staff, which is because internationalization has many advantages. The second idea was that if a university is export-oriented and strong on export markets, it's kind of easily adapting to the changing situations. So if there is something happening in a country, which is a potential market for the higher education, some legislatives, some regulations are being changed, maybe there is a tuition fee introduced and people would like to leave the country because they don't have money to pay for education, then this kind of export-oriented university is rather quick in responding to these kind of changes, and it can implement strategies, tactics in order to attract these students to Hungarian universities, which is basically good for the whole country, the whole economy, and the whole industry.